last week, Andy told a story, a short story about a person who was in prison and a prison guard. And I was touched by that story, but it triggered a long forgotten incident in my own life, in my own professional career. In the 60s in San Francisco was a wild time. It was wild all over the nation. There were many, many groups that sprung up from here and there, do-good groups and groups that thought they were do-good and weren't always so do-good. But what many of them lacked was the consciousness of Gandhi, was the wisdom of Gandhi about how to get their message across and how to get what they wanted without violence. Among those groups was a group called the Black Panthers, and it was headed up by Huey Newton and some others whose names slip my mind right now. And they were among those groups that didn't really understand, did not really have the wisdom or the consciousness to get their 10-point program off the ground without violence. The Economic Opportunity Council was born about then, and it funded many of these groups throughout the San Francisco Bay Area and actually across the nation. I had always been a privateer. I'd always worked for private enterprise, doing accounting on my own and for others. But for some reason, I got the notion that I wanted to work for the federal government or some government agency. And so I took a job as head accountant for the Economic Opportunity Council in San Francisco. And that was an interesting, that's a whole book. I'm going to tell you one incident that happened in my 3-month career. I didn't know this at the time that I took the job, but the prior accountant had quit because of the almighty stress that was involved with the job and the fear. Fear, yes, because these groups would come in and ask for their money, and quite often the money would not yet be there from the federal government. Because in those days we mailed stuff, we didn't electronically transfer, and the government being what it is, they were so, you know, all right important for it to be there on the 1st of the month or even the 5th, and so sometimes it was the 15th before we got the money, which was supposed to be there pretty much toward the beginning of the month. Well, the first month I was there, and I had heard stories about this Black Panther group coming in, wanting their money. This was after I took the job, of course. The Black Panther group coming in, wanting their money. And there being no money, and what would they do? They'd turn over desks, they'd throw typewriters and machines out the windows. They would just raise hell. I mean, really raise it. And so I was apprised of that situation. And the first month came around, I'd been there 2 weeks, and the beginning of the month came and there was no money. So I looked up one morning from my desk and I saw coming down the aisle, the office was open, there were no private offices, thank goodness. But the office was open, and I saw coming down the aisle a bevy of persons who didn't look happy. They were not a happy bunch. The man who was leading it was not a big man, but he was the darkest skinned man that I had ever seen in my life. Now, I have lived in San Francisco for 30 years. This man had the blackest eyes, the meanest look, and he had this fur hat down over his head, covering up a good bit of him, scowl, the whole 9 yards. And these linebackers behind him. And they came marching down the aisle and straight up in front of my desk. So I didn't have time to think about, what are you going to do now, Gert? I just stood up and stuck my hand out and introduced myself, said who I was, and that I know why you're here, and I know this money is really, really important to you. I know you really need it. I know you've promised this money to other people, and I know this is a very hard thing for me to say, but the money's not here yet. The money's not here yet. At that moment, I am looking straight into this man's eyes. And when I told him this, we stood there, locked eyes, for what probably was 30 seconds, felt like 3 hours. My knees, trying to keep my knees from shaking and knocking, not knowing what was going to happen. And we were locked eyes. And he said, we were locked eyes, and I saw his soul. It's just that quick. It was just that quick that I saw this flash go through his eyes, and I knew there was not going to be any violence that day. And he turned to his people and he said, thank you very much. He turned to his people and he said, we'll be back tomorrow. And they walked out. It's gonna be all right, I said. It's gonna be all right. The windows, the eyes are the windows.